Welcome, everyone. Can everyone see my screen okay? Give me a thumbs up. All right, good, good, good. So, Summer, that was great selection on that song, so thank you for that. That was well chosen there. So welcome everyone. Welcome to this afternoon session, Challenge with Change. Just to get everyone kind of comfortable with Zoom and make sure we're good with the features that we're going to use this afternoon. Julie, if you would kind of share with the group just a few reminders, please.
Sure, great. Thanks very much. So at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see there's a microphone icon. That's where you can keep yourself muted unless you're speaking to avoid any background noise. If you want to come on video, we invite you to do that. You can just click on the camera icon so the red line through it disappears. And then we invite you to click on the chat button and the participants button. And that's going to open a couple of panels on the right-hand side of your video view screen, which will allow you to chat with everyone and to see who else is in the room with you. If you have any technical questions or have any trouble during the session, please feel free to send me a private chat. My name is Julie McCowan. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's ATD Houston 2020 Talent Development Virtual Conference. Summer and I value your time, and our goal is for this time to be impactful for you. We look forward to your engagement. So feel free to chat us, feel free to come off mute and share your feedback and your opinions. We certainly want to hear from you. So just to share a little bit of an introduction, Summer and I are going to be your guides for today, navigating you through this topic, Challenge with Change. And again, we're humbled that you've taken the time out of your day-to-day, grateful that you're dedicating time and just pouring into yourselves, especially during this difficult year. So thank you for being in community with us. My name is Candelaria Reyes. My life's work has really been dedicated to growing and developing people professionally, working hard to align people with their strategy. And so that's comes across in services such as leadership coaching, training and facilitation, and diversity and inclusion for both the private and public sectors. Summer?
Thank you, Deanna. So I love to co-host, co-facilitate with you because we are like-minded, cut from the same cloth, and both have a passion for developing people and developing talent and obviously identifying strategy for people to live their fullest potential. And so thank you for having me here today to accompany you in learning some amazing tools.
Great. And welcome to all of you. So as we kind of kick off this afternoon's session, we recognize that the situation that we've been in this year, right, is affecting each of us differently. And the range is wide. Some of us have been in the eye of the storm and maybe peaks and valleys throughout these last several months. Some of us may have been on the front line kind of the battles and the stress and the anxiety and the emotions, right, are all unimaginable. While others of us have been trying to figure out how to deal with maybe income loss or revenue loss, maybe how to mitigate risk or staying safe, staying connected, right, virtually, like what we're trying to do today in this socially distant world. And so the idea here is that we are all in the same store, but certainly not in the same boat. Summer, I know that my boat has been rocky. It has certainly been rocky over these last 6 to 8 months. How's your boat been holding up?
All right. Well, that's a great question. And I appreciate you asking. And, I think now more than ever, people do appreciate just being asked and just it being acknowledged. I think for me, we have certainly had some very rocky days and nights. We have gone through a lot of different health issues on all spectrums of our family. So that's been challenging. And my husband and I are both small business owners. And so he is in private retail sales, and obviously myself being a consultant in leadership development and coaching. That has certainly been challenging. And not to mention having kids, kids of all ages. We have some older kids who have finished college, but everybody's at home. So everybody is working from home, and that can certainly be stressful. And at the same time, we have certainly found some joys in that as well. Just thrilled that my youngest is back in school face to face, and just trying to be cautious and stay healthy. So curious to know too, we'd like to ask you all, where are you holding today? And, we would like you to poll in here. Tell us how your boat is faring. Is it faring well in the storm? Or maybe you have some leaky holes that you're trying to plug. Or you may feel like your boat has sunk and you are actually on a life raft. So we'd love to get a temperature check from you all. So I think the poll has popped up there.
I don't see it, but maybe Julie has opened it up already.
Here we go. I just saw it pop up.
Good.
We'd like to hear from you all. And it really is true, Deanna. While we are all in the same storm, everybody's landscape looks very different. And I think it has looked different from month to month, and certainly even day to day.
Yeah, for sure. It has definitely been an ebb and flow.
Yeah. All right. Let's see.
So we've got a few kind of outstanding, well, just a couple more folks are polling in. Julie, are there any questions? Or I saw a few things chat, but I didn't get a chance to read. Anything that popped up in the chat?
No questions at this point.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I think we can go ahead and close the poll.
Yeah, let's see where we're at here.
So it looks like the majority of our audience is boat is faring well in the storm. So that I'm delighted to hear that. I'm so glad. We've got a couple of folks where there's some leaking holes and trying to plug. And so I definitely can relate and empathize with you all. That's certainly been the case for me in different periods of this time.
Well, and I'm happy to see that nobody feels like they're sinking. And so, I think that also has to do with where we are and adapting and how people are pivoting and learning this, what I call this new way forward. So that's a great sign. Happy to hear that. And my heart goes out to anybody whose boat does feel like it's sinking. So thank you. Thank you very much. Here is our agenda for today, our purpose and objectives. So we want to start with really focusing on the individual change that we are going to give tools over today. And you've got to start there. So the change starts with me. We'll move into how to successfully navigating this environment that we're in that's ever changing. And also just really try to grasp some new concepts and framework around perspective and how do we shift into different perspectives, and then gaining an understanding of different phases, that there's actually a phases that we go through and a process that we can apply to actually have successful change. So we are jumping right in, and I want to challenge all of you that are thinking about new ways of working or living, or even a personal health change, for example. Whatever it is, we would just like to share a model with you today that's very simple. At the same time, it's going to require some discipline, creativity, and courage. And that's what I said, courage. So remember that with change, it takes some courage. So with courage, we've got to think about what happens to us in change. What is our response, our initial response mechanism that's kind of deeply wired within us? Maybe it comes from an unknown place of, or even fear. Sometimes that change comes from motivation, whether it's a positive motivation or maybe a difficult negative type of motivation. And what if, though, if we, as I mentioned before, what if we reframe our mindset? Because that is actually the very first tiptoe into embarking into what change is all about. So it first starts with our mindset, because after all, perception creates our reality. And what's happening in our minds is incredibly powerful. More so today when we are being more present and having more time for stillness and quietness. So, how do you create an environment to feel safe when change or shift occurs? I'm curious. How do you feel you're able to do this? And those are things you can chat in. Chat in. But Deanna, talk through this with us for just a moment. What do you think some of those things are?
Yep. So for me, just personally, I think the first piece is building trust, and for me, trust doesn't happen overnight. So that takes some time, particularly in an environment like this, right? Maybe even and with that trust piece, I'll address kind of transparency and vulnerability, right? I think those are kind of two pieces on how to build trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, another way to really provide that environment to feel safe and to feel strength and, like you said, trust is really how do we get some quick wins? How do we create something where we are even tracking some milestones where we feel good about this new way forward that we're creating? So I think that's really important. So speaking of mindset, what's the most important thing that you would like to get out of today? So what's on your mind? We want to know. And so we've got another poll question here that we want to tap into to, again, get that temperature check and making sure we're honing in on all the right things for you and able to address them. So what's the most important thing you'd like out of today? So here are our questions, and you just select one of those if you would, please. What shift in perspective do I need to make to prevail? What's one thing I can do to stay encouraged during change? What do I need to do differently to navigate through this time? What's one thing I can do to stay the course? So which one of those are the most important things for you today?
Julie, as people are casting their vote here, anything in the chat?
No questions at this point.
Okay, great.
Diane, I did send you a private message.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, how are we doing? Are we tallied up yet?
Yep. So it looks like we're almost at a split. The first kind of number one response is, what's one thing I can do to stay encouraged during your change? So one thing to stay encouraged during change. And then the second, yep. Oh, here we go. We close that. All right. So number one is, what's one thing I can do to stay encouraged during our change? And then we've got a tie there. What do I need to do differently to navigate through this time? And then what's one thing I can do to stay the course? So we've got responses in all buckets here.
Okay, super.
We do have a question in the chat now.
Okay.
From Nick Ducote Agreco. How do I encourage a change in my organization when I feel like my voice is not being heard?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And I think, here is where we will tackle first that individual change and making sure that you hear your voice clearly, because then you can go out and speak your own truth, and that will encourage change within your organization. So we'll first start at this micro level. Deanna's going to share an awesome model with us today that hopefully Nick will pinpoint what you're speaking of. And we can also talk offline about some other ways to be able to do that, to be able to feel like your own voice is being heard. Deanna?
All right. So the idea here is this is just one tool that you can add to your toolbox that can equip you to successfully implement change. And to the question in the chat, I'm hoping that once we kind of unpack this model, you'll see how those pieces are addressed. Maybe some of you have seen this model before. The founder of ProSci AdCard change management model, Jeff Hyatt. It's a framework that's really focused on the people side of change, right? The pieces to accept a significant change, to implement and sustain a change, starting with the individual, starting with myself, right? And so at a high level, we start with being aware of the need for the change, right? And understanding why it should happen or need to happen. And in this phase, we're really getting our mind wrapped around what exactly is changing. Why now, right? Once we have an understanding, then we move into making a personal choice on whether we want to change or not, okay? And so for a change to be successful, this is a critical step. I think that all steps are important, but in my opinion, this personal choice, this piece right here, desire, right? This individual choice is probably the most important piece, because if we don't have that desire and motivation truly connected to us as individuals, the other pieces are all kind of done in vain. That they will quickly fall apart. Then we move to equipping ourselves and others on how to change. Here's where we're discovering what competencies and abilities, this is kind of the knowledge piece there, we may or may not have in order to change. And then finally, how to sustain that change over time. So the reinforcement piece. Summer and I are going to work to highlight each stage of the model today, but we're going to primarily focus in awareness and desire. Okay, so we're primarily going to be in those two pieces. Again, because if those two pieces are not solidified and well connected, the other pieces just won't happen. So I recognize that this is a simple process, but it's a tough process because it's going to involve each of us digging deep to find some of the answers, right? Going beyond those surface responses.
Absolutely, Deanna. And let's really unpack this a bit for just a moment, because here's what's going on. Talking about just that first lever, which is awareness. Our brains have evolved to really like certainty. And, especially in uncertain times, this can really cause a lot of angst. And so awareness is so important. And, this certainty stems from our basic drive to survive. I mean, we have evolved to predict and control our circumstances because doing so really optimizes our ability to live. But when we experience change, our brain can interpret it as we know, that fight, flight, or freeze. And a lot of times that's incredibly challenging. And so how we perceive that dictates, what our process is, how we process things. So I thought this was really a fabulous key research that I wanted to share with everyone, that, on an average, we experience 27 emotions during the day. And I have to tell you, especially the first 3 months of COVID, I felt like I was, on average, experiencing not 456 emotions in a day, but in an hour, it felt like. So, I just think this is really amazing, all of the brain research that we have and what's happening as we're filtering. And one of the, key here is really having empathy. And it's an essential building block for compassion, as you can see. Daniel Goleman really is the guru of emotional and social intelligence as far as one of the founding fathers. And what I want you to recognize is not just giving your colleagues, your family members some compassion and empathy, but give yourself some. I think that's one of the biggest learnings I've taken from this time. And, in all seriousness, though, as far as, thinking about 456 emotions, we have to recognize emotions are what we feel, not who we are. And so this really leads into that first step, into the ADKAR model, I feel like, into awareness.
So the first step of this approach is called awareness. And, at this point, we're really focused on the what, right? Not the how. Building awareness is defined within the ADKAR model really means sharing both the nature of the change and answering why this change is necessary. So it's kind of a two-piece there. All right. And so what that translates into is really explaining kind of the drivers or the opportunities that have resulted for the need for the change. It also means kind of addressing why a change is needed now versus tomorrow or 6 months or a year from now, and explaining the risk of not doing this, right, of not changing. If you remember, we've only succeeded at building awareness when we say that an individual, starting with one, can say that I understand the nature of the change and why this change is being needed. Okay, so I think it's important that we just kind of take a minute to quantify what exactly needs to happen. If I give just kind of a simple example, let's think about maybe an individual health change. Okay, maybe we want to exercise more, or we may want to shed some pounds, right? Instead of the freshman 15, now we're seeing the quarantine 19 weight gain, right? So the point here is, if we look at an example like a health change, right? We want to be specific. I want to lose 10 pounds in 3 months. Okay, why does this need to happen? Why now? Who's involved? Who's involved in the change? Okay, is it just me? Or in this example, is it my spouse or my partner or my kids? Because now we've got to all eat healthy meals around the dinner table. Okay, is it people that live with me or socialize with me? Okay, so you want to think about kind of all those branches of that awareness piece. And in this stage, I would really encourage you to to dig deep here and to be curious. Because what we might see through that first lens probably isn't the whole picture, right? So if we don't ask those series of why questions, why now? Who's involved? Why should I do it? What's the risk of doing this? What's the risk of not doing it? We're really going to miss out on some pieces getting later into the rest of the model. So let's take a minute, Summer, to check
Can we
in,
check
right?
in?
Yeah,
let's check in, because I'm hoping that we can use the chat feature here as well. And we would like to know, just share, are you, what are some of these things that you're facing in your job right now, in your career, that's requiring change? And we would love for you to be, as specific as possible. And, as many of us are really having to shift our agency, our environment, what are you seeing happening for you? And what have you noticed? What industry you're in, whether it's customer service, what's happening as far as keeping your workforce and workspace safe, depending on what kind of risk you're trying to mitigate. So we're curious to hear from you, and even, some of your personal challenges and changes going on right now, big or small. We'd love to hear from you.
Julie, can you share some of the responses that are coming in through the chat, please?
Sure. I see one from Sarah that says a huge influx of new team members has placed a strain on our team because of limited resources. I see another one from Nick that says the way we deliver technical training with the lack of hands-on training due to COVID.
Yeah, it makes it very challenging.
We invite you to go ahead and enter your concerns into the chat. And people can also take themselves off of mute if they want to contribute verbally, I suspect, right, Deanna?
Yeah, no, that would be great.
Yeah.
And I was going to also open up and say, if y'all want to share any personal changes that you've, been faced with during these last 6 or 8 months, feel free to share those.
Robin says, improving and increasing skills to meet an uncertain future.
Yes. Walking in the dark, right? Not knowing exactly where the target is.
Yeah.
And if you don't see the ability to chat, just click on the little chat button along the bottom edge of your screen and those chat windows will open. Keith says there's a big push to virtual classes and how to engage those actively to increase retention and ownership with agency goals.
Yes. We've seen
And
that.
let me ask just kind of a follow-up question to the folks who have shared the change that they're seeing in their job or in their personal life. Just curious, with those changes, what's been kind of your personal motivation to adjust or to acclimate or to adopt that specific change? And the answer isn't because my boss said so or because my organization said so. So really encourage you to dig deep here and kind of true to yourself. What's that personal drive there?
Robin says to find a job. Sarah says she sees it as an opportunity to grow and learn.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, it's true. Really, this is stretching us. I like to say to my coaching clients, you're being stretched into your greatness. Exactly. I like that.
Part of the reason, I'm asking this question obviously is, around this piece of desire, right? And so motivation is extremely important to the changes that you all, shared, because it's really going to be what propels us to have that desire to change, that drive to change. Okay. And it's going to have some big impacts on our readiness for change. Okay. Because at this point, we're talking about what's coming from within. All right. You all have probably heard the acronym WIFM, right? What's in it for me? And building this desire is ultimately about personal choice. This step is all about our individual willingness and personal choice to move forward to whatever that next step is. Interestingly enough, when we've looked hindsight 2020 at kind of past change projects or change efforts, at this exact stage, at the stage of desire, is exactly where most change efforts, most people fail. Okay, because they fail to have the desire, as no one can control that but you, right? No edict, right? No policy, no statement of we will march right instead of marching left is going to control that, but you. And like I said earlier, I think this is probably the toughest building block. In any effort of change, you can pump in knowledge and training. You can put reinforcers in place, whether they be positive or negative, consequences. But if you aren't in, the other steps are in vain. All right, this is personal, so make it personal. The other thing I'll say is when I think about changes that we're all having to go through right now, whether that's loss and grief or adapting to new work styles, adapting to the unknown, right, what the future holds. If we've had to adjust to new coworkers like spouses and children and pets at home, right? Really encourage you to think about your true motivator, all right? Your motivators are essentially going to impact the outcomes and sustainability of this effort.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know that, in my organization and what I see in other organizations that my clients that I work with, the mentality a lot of times is, we just need to move into action. And, we often kind of think, oh, well, we don't have time for that awareness desire piece to really hash it out. We're just given a directive and it's ready, set, go. But it really is critical because that is strategy. And that is where we'll find that intrinsic motivation to keep going when the going gets really tough, to be able to align back to that desire, I feel like, Deanna. So that really is a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, and in this piece too, Summer, I'll just add, when we're digging deep to answer this question, I would encourage you to huddle up with someone, get an accountability partner, right? And just really get them to kind of drill you down, because our temptation may be just to give kind of those one or two responses, but really trying to get to the heart of that is really critical.
Agree.
So kind of the next piece, right? I think, in my opinion, we've covered the two hardest pieces, right? Awareness and desire. The next two phases, I'm going to go rather swiftly through, but they have to do with our knowledge and ability to change. Okay, so the first is our knowledge on how to how to change. Okay, this is what we're doing during the transition. Many times this comes off like some training program, right? Some course, some how-to, some instruction, right? And then the knowledge on how to perform to support that change. Okay, so this is things like new processes, new skills, new techniques. So I think we're going to open up the chat here for just a second and talk a little bit about the skills and knowledge needed for a specific change.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's take a moment to look at this from even a personal perspective. I would like to get some of the thoughts here from our participants. Is there anybody who'd like to volunteer or to pop on and share with us? I see a lot of great things in the chat and people sharing as far as, their personal things, so that everyone did contribute. So thank you very much for sharing. But is there anybody who would like to share what skills and knowledge that you feel like you'll need for the change that you want to make? I see lots of learning.
Yep, you can go ahead and take yourselves off mute if you'd like to speak, or put your responses in chat.
Chime in.
Hello, everybody. I think it's a huge challenge for me to erase some of the old mindsets and actually embrace the new that's coming in with all the change. It's been a spectacular year. That flexibility and spontaneity has to be a major part of what we do in our training. And that's a big challenge. I mean, because you're set to going in the classroom and rah information down the throats type of deal. That doesn't work anymore.
Yep.
And so these are really good ideas, and we have to change inside us before we can help others change.
That's bingo, Keith, right there. You very well said. And all of that, guess what? It goes back to awareness and desire. Okay, so before you pump in whatever you're trying to shove down their throat, right? It's all around, why the heck am I doing this? Why do I care? Why is this important to me? What happens if I don't? Those 20 questions. And that's really where the conversation needs to start, right? Before we get into kind of our traditional training, or I know we don't have traditional training anymore, but our kind of efforts of our daily work that we're used to. Thank you, Keith, for sharing that. Yeah. Anyone else? Julie, any comments in the chat?
Sarah says technology skills are one of the pieces of knowledge and skill that are going to be needed for the change.
Yep, absolutely right. Good. So thank y'all for sharing your thoughts there. So as we're kind of working through this model, ability is where the change actually occurs. All right. So how do we build this ability? And I'm preaching to the choir here. I recognize that. But what does it take? It takes hands-on practice. It takes time. God forbid we give people time and we don't act like robots and machines and expect it all to turn around tonight or tomorrow, right? Tools, support, right? Support from sponsors. If you look at this COVID situation, the beauty is we have many, many opportunities to practice, right? The other thing I'll mention about the 5 stages, the 5-stage process here, is that it's sequential but not linear. So let me explain that. So we're going to go through these steps in order, okay? But it doesn't mean that I won't jump back a step or two before moving forward. So an example, let's say that your organization has decided to move the majority of its employees back to their working location, right? Back to their home office or their site or whatever. All right, and you've implemented safety measures, you got masks and hygiene stations, and we got socially distanced practices. All right, we got the whole, the whole protocol there. All right. And you understand why we're doing this. You see the value because we work better in the office. You see greater benefit to your group by returning to work, right? We're all doing this as safely as possible. Lord knows we've done lots of safety trainings and phone calls and briefings on how to handle this situation. Okay, so you're starting to feel pretty comfortable on returning back to public places, back to the office. And you're having lots of opportunities to practice and kind of tweak along. But all of a sudden, what happens? All of a sudden, there's a significant outbreak of virus infections in your department, okay? And now what happens? What happens to your mindset there? Now I'm not so sure. Now I'm not so sure I want to go down this route. Now I've backtracked to the piece in the process of desire, my motivation. Now I'm not so sure if I'm willing to continue to work this way. Okay, so I had gotten all the way up to ability, but now a variable happened, a change happened, and now I've backtracked. Okay, so just a reminder here that yes, we move from stage to stage, but it doesn't mean that, once we've arrived, we're there, right? It's a likelihood that we may go back a stage or two.
Good.
So before we get into this last stage, I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about resistance. We all face resistance during this transition of change. And if you think recently about your personal experience with just COVID, and we're just kind of using this as a backdrop example, when did you truly accept that it was here? And it would change how we live and potentially how we work, for the long term, right? Think about the denial or the grief or the loss, right, that you faced. Think about maybe your willingness to adapt to working remotely or self-isolation, right? Or all of the hygiene protocols that are in place. Okay, just take a second and maybe consider your experience and use the chat feature to share with us what barriers, right? What barriers are you facing with how your job has changed?
Yeah, that's really great, Deanna. Well, they're all chatting in or and putting in some of those barriers. It is really important, that we bring this up, because I do think it's natural for us, just as humans, we resist that, right? You feel the push and you resist it. And we have to move past that, and ideally quickly, so we can adapt and get adjusted and move forward. And just important to name them, because then we can plan on how to tackle them and confront them when we really identify with them. And to me, this, where we know this change is breaking down is so important, because it can be disruptive, it can be ineffective. And I think the key to identifying where that initial barrier is surfacing, then we can figure out how to deal with it and navigate, as you said earlier, and then, make sure that we can move from there. What are we seeing in the chat, just out of curiosity?
Yes, Robin says that homeschooling was a huge barrier to re-entry.
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah says sometimes lack of mortgage knowledge limits her ability to help fellow trainers as they're busy training new team members.
Yep. Good.
Sure.
Good. Thanks for sharing. So encourage you to kind of think about those, give yourself some time to think through those, right? So we've arrived to the last stage, and I know we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I just want to mention this to you briefly. And Summer said this, when we're in full swing of the journey, it's a natural tendency to revert back to what we know, right? Old habits die hard, right? It's easy to go back to that. In fact, there's research emerging about how the brain functions, right? That suggests it's not just a natural tendency, but a physiological tendency. while making a change is difficult, sustaining that change can be even more difficult. And so that's why reinforcement is such a critical component. So think about that. You know, what's one thing you can do to reinforce your change? Okay. What are things that can keep that change in place? Really a critical component here.
Absolutely.
So if you want to chat in, you know, what's one thing you can do to reinforce your change?
And I see that second question there, Deanna, which is how can your stakeholders help you reinforce that change? Absolutely.
Yep.
And that's also the beauty of having an accountability partner.
Yep.
Whether it's your spouse or having a coach or a colleague. So that's a big one. And just a time check here. We're about 2 minutes till.
Yep. So we're at 2 minutes away, and I know we've sped through this model, just highlighting kind of the 5 key stages. But this particular session has 2 parts. So in the course material, you will see an ADKAR worksheet, and then I think Julie's going to put it in the chat. And so here's what our ask is. There's a worksheet there, and what we'll ask for you to do is work to complete that between now and next week. Okay, think about your own personal change, whether that be personal or professional, you know, whatever change you are embarking on. Think about the barriers, think about the motivations, think about just the reasons why to do this, why we have to change, whatever that change is. And what I would like to do is invite you all to join us next week for a discussion, right? So you have an opportunity to practice, and I realize you need some time to kind of digest this and kind of get your arms around these different phases and have some time for introspection. So invite you to come back and join us next week for that discussion, and that'll be opportunity for you to share what you've learned and what you're picking up on.
Deanna, do you want to share the date and time of that session?
Yes, that's a good, let me find that. Okay, so that is November 3rd, which is next Tuesday. And I think we're just at the lunch hour. I think we start, I think we start at 12 o'clock that day. So it'll be a very informal session, but just an opportunity to share, you know, what you are applying, what you're practicing.
Is that Central Time, Deanna?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
And our last slide has the best thought ever, which is change is what happens when the pain of staying the same outweighs or is greater than the pain of changing. So I think that's such a profound statement. Keith, thank you.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for participating and your feedback. Encourage you to explore this, try the homework, and look forward to your feedback next week.
And Keith, bring that question back to us next week after you work on your worksheet. We'll get back around making sure that you're influencing others so that you are being heard with making changes. Thank you, everyone. Deanna,
sure.
my colleague, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. As you're leaving the session, feel free to chat in. What's one word or phrase describing how you feel about participating in this session? Just share with us what resonated with you, what kind of stuck, a key point.
Yeah, I always love hearing that.
Yeah.
Those are my takeaways for the day.
What's the takeaway? And then also, I believe the conference leaders will be sending you all a survey at the end of the day. So encourage you to fill that out. We look forward to your feedback and your thoughts on your experience. So thank you. Thank you again.